Hello, everyone.
Namaste.
This is Sitashma,
I'm Simone, and welcome to Anthropause.
Episode 1 Breaking the Ice.
What a clever episode name. We're breaking the ice with all our listeners today.
And also touching on the topic of mountains, ice, and climate change.
Speaking of mountains, Sitashma, I was just scrolling across Twitter and came across this picture that showed mountains that look like big rocks.
Yeah, I've seen those as well, and they do look quite out of the ordinary.
Yeah, shrinking and melting of glaciers is one of the most documented signs of global warming.
And have you heard about the glacial lake outburst at Uttarakhand that has caused over 58 deaths?
Yeah, truly devastating. There previously have been reports about such events. There was a similar event in Uttarakhand itself in 2013 and in the Andes in Peru since the 1940s. But what is shocking is how frequently these have been occurring nowadays. In Nepal, in the Himalayas, which is one of the most glaciated mountain range with about 600 billion tons of ice, people are constantly under risk.
This fact is often overlooked, and that's the worst thing because, especially in our country, due to multiple reasons. One being lack of awareness of climate change, and also because of the remoteness of the Himalayan area. The indigenous communities who are most vulnerable to this threat have limited voice, and I find this very concerning.
Hmm. I would love to learn more about this from someone who knows the region well and has firsthand experience with the implications of climate change in this region.
Well, Simon, we are at luck. Let me introduce our guest, Mr. Dawa Steven Sherpa. Dawa Steven Sherpa is a mountaineer, adventurer, environmentalist, and also an entrepreneur.
He has summited Mount Everest, Sagarmatha, 3 times along with other Himalayan peaks such as Mount Kanchenjunga, Choyu, Manaslu, and Lhotse. He also launched the Eco Everest expedition, which focuses on cleaning Mount Everest.
He's also the co-founder and chair of Himalayan Climate Initiative, a youth-driven civil society organization in Nepal that has produced impactful campaigns such as Hamri Baini, a social enterprise that focuses on creating green jobs for Nepali women, and the No Thanks Minimalist movement. Dawadai, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Simone. It's lovely to be here and honored to be your first guest.
Yes, thank you so much for being part of the show. We look forward to our conversation today.
So, Dawadai, before we dive into the main theme of our conversation, Simon and I were just talking about the recent glacial lake outburst at Chamoli, Uttarakhand. What can be attributed as the primary cause for this?
Well, the primary cause for it, well, it's a little complicated, right? But in a nutshell, it's basically human impact. First of all, you know, the big flood itself, it was triggered because an avalanche blocked a big river. And then when it broke through the avalanche, it, you know, devastated everything below it. And it was made even worse because there were hydropower projects there, you know, reservoirs and so on. So that actually cascaded into a much bigger problem than it already was. So, you know, why did the avalanche actually happen there? It's because, you know, climate change is happening more and more and at a bigger scale. Now, that's one type of flood that we have, you know, just seen in Uttarakhand. We have seen it in Nepal as well. You know, in 2012, we saw the same sort of phenomena happen in the Annapurna region when the Sethi River flooded and killed some 50 odd people in that flood as well. And there's something similar going on, but, you know, the impact through the impact of climate change, which is, again, glaciers melting and actually becoming bodies of water themselves rather than blocking a river. And this water, this pool of water also bursts out of its banks and comes down, similar to what we saw in Uttarakhand. So, you know, a big warning sign for all of us.
Talking about climate change, right? Glaciers across the Himalayas have experienced significant ice loss over the past 40 years, with the average rate of ice loss doubling in the 21st century. What impact does this continue to have in the region, the local people, and climbers?
Well, you could almost look at it like you're looking through a zoom lens, right? So if you focus really close in, like from a mountaineer's point of view, right? I'm a climber, right? So um, the mountains that we're climbing, all the ice and the snow, it's all melting. So what's happening is we're seeing, one thing, more avalanches happening because the snow is not, the slopes are not solid, right? They're not as stable as they used to be. So we see more and more avalanches happening. We also see more rockfall coming down the mountain and hitting us. More accidents happening because of that. Why? Because the snow, which used to act like a glue and would stick the rock to the slope, that glue is gone, and so all the rocks are falling down. So from a mountaineer's point of view, it's getting really dangerous, right? And then um, zooming slightly out now, the whole mountain, the route is changing. Our climbing routes are changing because what used to be easy to grow over a snow slope now is like a sheer rock. So now we have to find a different way around. But that's also happening at a more sort of community level. Trails between villages are also getting damaged, are also changing because either they used to go over glaciers, and so that glacier is melting, or they used to be on permafrost, and now the permafrost is melting and going, and it's all collapsing. So that's that those are physical changes that you can see with your eyes. I already mentioned the glacial lakes that are forming, huge glacial lakes, so threatening to sort of thunder down and wipe everything out. And we've already had, these are not hypotheticals. These things have happened. In 1984, in the Khumbu, in the Everest region, we had a big glacial lake outburst flood, and it wiped out a newly built micro hydro power plant, which is supplying electricity to Namche Bazaar and Kumjung, my own ancestral village. And it was only 10 years later, in 1994, that a new hydropower plant was built. So literally, development was stopped for 10 years because of that glacial lake outburst flood. Now, where there's melting, we also need to talk about water, right? So a big problem is, in the dry season, these glaciers act like a water storage, and so it would slowly melt and give water to the villagers. Now, when the glaciers disappear altogether, there's nothing to store that water. So in the dry season, there is no water. And now we're seeing cases in villages, especially like in Mustang and Dolpa, where the water, it's very arid land there. Villagers having to completely, move out of the region because they don't have any water anymore. So the water security is a huge problem. So that's now on a more community level. Now, if you go back even further, right? If you look at a whole regional aspect, look at India and Nepal, like all this water that's stored on in the mountains, in the glaciers in the mountains, that all trickles down into the plains, down towards billions of people. About the estimate is about 1.5 billion people on both sides of the Himalayas depend on the water for everything from agriculture, drinking, of course, industry, hydropower. And so that water is slowly disappearing, right? And you can only imagine what will happen when that water tank empties. What kind of problems? It's not going to be environmental problems. They're going to be humanitarian problems, right? So, I think that gives you a sort of a glimpse into what the future might hold for us.
Yeah. So, like, evidently, from what you just said, the people, but in particular, the indigenous people in the Himalayas are on the front lines of climate change. But then they are often left out of the conversation, like we never hear about them. So, could you tell us why it is important to include these people and their voices and dialogue, research, climate strategy, and policy making and beyond?
Well, I mean, there's two things, right? One, I think, we can say climate justice, because these people didn't contribute to the problem, right? So it was caused by people far, far away, thousands of miles away, living lavish lives. And it's the poorest of the people, living in the most harshest of conditions. They're the ones who are having to face this now. And they're having to face it with the resources, the scarce resources that they have. So it's not fair. Okay, that's one thing. But on a sort of a more practical level, the people in the mountains are actually the canaries in the mine shaft. Basically, what we are going through in the mountains now, the rest of the world is going to have to face eventually, right? So take that sort of warning from us, see what we're going through, and take it and say, okay, right? This stuff is serious. We need to do something about it. And so, everything I talked about, from disasters to water security to impact on industry, agriculture, all of that's all going to happen eventually to everybody in the world if we don't solve this climate change issue, right? Now, the problem is that a lot of people, they don't, they think it's a problem far, far away. It's somewhere in the Himalayas. Oh, it's only happening to penguins and polar bears. No, it's happening to real people, right? And so it's going to happen to you as well. But why do people, why do our politicians, our leaders, not make a big deal about it? Well, first of all, it's very difficult to work in the mountains, right? And especially in a country like Nepal, where your resources, if you're, say, in power and you have X rupees, right, you're going to spend it on a place where it has the most impact for the number of people that live there. So if you're going to spend a large amount of money on a relatively few number of people, politically it doesn't make sense, right? Also, you're not going to get that many voters from the mountains as opposed to, say, from a city in Tarai. So that's one thing, right? Also, NGOs, NGOs, INGOs, they have a difficult time working in the mountains, again, because of the terrain. It's a difficult place to work. It's easier to work in the lower hills or even, down in the plains, because obviously the terrain is easier. And also you can show success, right? Your projects have to show success. And when your chances of success are less, then you're going to be averse to that. So that's the second thing. And finally, the third thing is also, most of the people that live in the mountains are ethnic minorities, right? And so culturally, they're also excluded from a lot of the conversation. And so that is also a third aspect of why their voice doesn't get heard. So hopefully, as we go further, and especially my own work, and through my organization, Himalayan Climate Initiative, we'll get those voices heard, not only in Nepal, but throughout the world.
Definitely. Also, talking about these projects, sometimes the indigenous experiential knowledge is overlooked over scientific methodologies. Are there any community-based adaptation methods used by the local communities in this region right now to build their own resilience?
Yeah, definitely. Look, I mean, I can talk about my own Sherpa community, right? Before the national park came in, before all the laws, the wildlife conservation laws and all of that came in, the Sherpas had their own local laws called the D, right? DHI. And this was a system of maintaining a balance between the people and nature, right? So there were specific times when you were allowed to go, and even today, we still follow the D, right? Specific times when you can go and cut wood, right? There are specific times when you could bring animals down or down to the village or take them up to pasture. So there are, local indigenous laws or rules that that have been handed over from generation to generation, which has allowed the people in the mountains to live in harmony, right? But of course, modern pressures also put that a little bit off balance, and that's where we can marry scientific knowledge with the indigenous knowledge and come up with robust plans and strategies.
So since our podcast is called the Anthropause, and the term was created by scientists in 2020 after observing the human inactivity on the environment, observing the impact of human inactivity on the environment. So what implications did COVID-19 have on the mountains and the people whose livelihood solely depends on tourism and such?
So in September and October, so I'm just, I'm sharing my experience. Right? I mean, I don't have an empirical scientific study, but I'm sharing my own observation and my own experience, which is all you can hope for me to do. In September and October, I went to the mountains, right? And this was after the lockdown. Nepal went into lockdown in March. And in the winter, so before March, it was winter anyway. So there were no tourists going to the mountains. So it was probably about November or so, the last people had actually gone to the mountains where I visited. This was the Hunku Valley between Mount Everest and Mount Makalu. In that time period, about, roughly about 10 months or 11 months, the paths had been completely, they disappeared really, right? The grass and the shrubs, they'd all grown over the paths. And we really had to look hard to find our way through the mountains. And this is a relatively well visited, popular trekking destination. So it's surprising that even within a year, nature was able to, I would say, heal itself. Nature was able to come back in such a strong way. So it really got me thinking at that time. It was like, if we humans don't exist here, nature seems to be doing a fine job to take care of itself. It really is us humans, having to look out for our own survival. Climate change, I think, is going to cause the extinction of us human beings before it causes the extinction of all of nature, right? So that's something to take away. Well, at least that's something I took away from that experience.
Right. I do remember on social media, people were posting pictures saying, oh, wow, we've never seen such clear peaks in so long. But because of COVID-19, now we can finally see mountains.
Yeah. I mean, that was amazing. I mean, you guys were in the States, right? You should have seen the mountains. I was in Kathmandu at the time during the lockdown, and I did go up to the Khumbu, and like the air quality was just amazing. And it looks like very like hopefully we don't need a pandemic, for that. But it does look like when we humans come together and do something like in a unified way, although it was forced upon us, it can be achieved.
Right. I feel like the last time I saw like a beautiful view of the mountains was like probably in 2008. Do you remember, Simone, like we had that balcony up in like Rato Bangla, and like, yeah, and you could see like a distance. And I remember we went up there to do some art activity, and we saw the mountains. But then after that, I feel like I had to go to either Pokhara or somewhere to see the mountains clearly. So yeah.
Yeah. And then talking about pollution, right? Now let's move on. Like, it is important to talk about the effects of climate change, but it is also very important to talk about the topic of waste. I'm sure you've heard that there are microplastics found on the top of Everest now. Was that surprising to you at all?
Well, no, of course not, because I've been cleaning Everest since 2008, right? So I knew it was there because I've actually collected all that crap up there, right? So it wasn't a surprise to me. I was just surprised that people were surprised that there were microplastics up there. So sometimes you see the world from your own perspective. You think people know all the problems, but apparently, like that was a big eye opener for a lot of people, which is a really good thing. Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little on the eco expedition and the inspiration behind it and why it was important for you to do so?
Yeah, sure. I first went to climb Everest in 2007, right? And I was quite shocked at the time by what I saw. There's so much garbage and human waste on the mountain, and there wasn't any effort to clean any of that up. The government has policies in place that dissuades people from leaving garbage, but doesn't have any policies to bring garbage off the mountain. And so when I went there, I felt that I needed to do something about it, right? And it was really, I mean, it was just a mission of this young guy who wanted to do something to make an impact, and the thing is, like, if I had to put that whole expedition together, like recruit lots of people, it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, because Sherpas are expensive. It's a dangerous job. They have to be there for 2 months. They have to be fed and all that. So I actually looked around and I realized that a lot of the Sherpas who were climbing, like on my own team and on other teams, they're actually taking stuff up the mountain, like tents and food and equipment, and then they'd be coming down empty, right? And then again, next time they'd be going up with more food and tents and all that. This happens throughout the 2-month period until the end, when they clean everything off the mountain, their own equipment. But I saw an opportunity that every time they came down on every rotation, we call it, like, why don't they bring some garbage down, and I'd give them, money per kilo. And so I started, within the Eco Everest expedition, I started a scheme called Cash for Trash. And so basically, collect any garbage on the way, bring it down to me. We'll weigh it every day at 4 p.m. We call it weighing and paying. So, every day at 4 p.m. And, for every 1 kilo, we would give 100 rupees. And I was very surprised that, in the first couple of years, we collected over 7 tons just in the first 2 years, right? And it became quite a good success, I must say, and I'm quite proud of that. And I also have to say, at the same time, over the years, not only myself but other organizations, other expeditions, including now the government of Nepal, also in 2019, launched cleanup campaigns on Everest, and did actually launch cleanup expedition to clean the mountain. So there have been others who've been in on this effort, and I would say Mount Everest is one of the cleanest popular mountains in the world, right? So of all the 7 summits, Mount Everest is probably one of the cleanest of all the mountains. So that's something that we as Nepalis can be proud of. But of course, the media doesn't focus on that part, of course, right? They want to focus on all the negativity. But if you look, the before and after picture from people who go to the gym, we should have something like that for Everest, and people will be shocked how much cleaner it is today than it ever was before.
So we had asked our followers to estimate the amount of. So we had asked our followers to estimate the amount of garbage collected from Everest by your expedition between 2008 and 2020. And we had a range of answers from 100 kilos to 60,000 kilos. So could you give us the answer?
Since 2008, when I first started the cleanup expeditions, I have collected over 22,000 kilograms of garbage from Everest.
I don't think even at least till now, we've not had a single correct answer. So, okay.
It's a little more than 100 kilos, but well short of the 60,000, right?
Right. Right. Mm-hmm.
Collecting garbage is one part of solving the problem, but do you think it's possible to incorporate the idea of zero waste into mountain climbing?
Yeah, for sure. Mountain climbing is probably, the easiest place to implement something like zero waste. We already follow something called leave no trace. And in fact, the government of Nepal requires that we take everything away with us, right? Everything back off the mountain that we took there anyway. So yes, very much so. You can do it. The problem is there isn't good monitoring. So people like myself, there are a lot of people like myself who do care about the mountains and who do the right thing. But for every, say, 101 of us, there might be one who's not, right? Who only cares about bagging the peak, as they say, or running a cheap operation and make some money, right? So it's those people that we need to educate, that we need to bring on board, and only then, if they still don't behave properly, they should be reprimanded or punished. But the problem is that those who are supposed to be there and monitor what everybody does, namely the government liaison officers, by and large, they don't come to the mountains, even though they're supposed to. They're paid to do that work. They don't come to the mountains, and that is a big problem with mountaineering and the problems that we see in Nepal. As you know, the government makes fantastic rules which look good on paper, but nobody enforces them, and that's why nothing goes according to plan. So taking that example, from the mountains, we could do not only on the mountains a lot of leave no trace, zero waste, but we could do things like that here in Kathmandu as well, right? But it does need people who are dedicated to that, and people who are being paid to do this work for them to actually do the work, right?
Yeah, so this perfectly ties in with our next question. So, you have dedicated your life to taking care of the Himalayas, and a message that you've given to the public in your previous talks is that it is our turn to look after the Himalayas now. So what does this statement personally mean to you?
Okay. So like as you know, I'm Sherpa, right? At least I'm half Sherpa. My mother's from Belgium, so for all your viewers who are thinking this guy doesn't look Sherpa, well, that might explain it. So we come from the mountains, and um, our mythology, what it says is that Guru Rinpoche, or Guru Padma Sambhava in Sanskrit, he set aside these sacred hidden valleys in the mountains for his followers to escape to in times of conflict. And so, about 500 years ago, 600 years ago, Sherpas started fleeing from Tibet to avoid conflict in their homeland in Tibet. And so, they moved into these valleys. In fact, the name Sherpa itself, Shar means east and Pa means people, right? So Sherpas actually mean people from the east. We actually migrated from the east into the mountains, so the east of Tibet, right? Kham, and that's that area. So the mountains took care of the Sherpas for centuries, right? It gave us a safe place, and it also gave us access to trading routes, right? It gave us access to the Tibetan plateau. It gave us access to go down trade in the plains as well. So the mountains has always looked after us, right? Now, the in the last 50 years, the mountains have looked after us even more as tourists from all over the world came to the Himalayas, in particular the Everest region. And so we have benefited so much from the mountains, the Sherpa people. And my grandfather used to say, like, the mountains took care of us, now we have to take care of the mountains, right? And so that's something that is a philosophy in my family. And so today, everything that's happening around the world, our sort of global modern lifestyle has impacted the mountains. And so it's now our turn to look after the mountains. And so we Sherpas feel this very strongly. And we are trying to do our best to protect the mountains that have protected us for so long.
That is such a beautiful message. Is this the reason why the mountains keep calling you back and you're preparing for your 4th Everest ascent?
It's one of the reasons, yeah. I mean, I just love being in the mountains, right? It's who I am. It's what I've always liked doing. Even my earliest memory, with my grandfather was riding his horse, in the village, and he was telling us about the stories, the old stories, and so on. So the mountains are part of my heritage, a part of my identity, and it might sound a little bit narcissistic, maybe in a way, but in Kathmandu and the rest of the world, I feel like I'm just an average guy. But in the mountains, I feel so strong and I feel so good. There's just something that comes out in the mountains for me. It might be my genetics that's allowing me to enjoy the mountains, but whatever it is, I love the mountains, just being there, the fresh air, the views, it's sort of my place in the world.
Yeah, so like a sense of belonging, basically, that you don't feel anywhere else. Yeah.
Yes.
That's real.
Thank you, Sitashma, for very articulately putting that for me.
Yeah, I feel like, especially after, coming to the States to study, that's something that I constantly am in search for, a sense of belonging. So yeah, that's really beautiful. So Dawadai, as we approach the end of this episode, what advice do you have for future climbers and also the wider Nepali society?
For future climbers, not just for future climbers, but even present climbers, we are, we hold the baton right now. We need to run with it. We need to tell the world what we see with our own eyes, whether that's through giving talks or whether that's through the photographs. And we need to tell the world what's happening in the mountains, because we are the witnesses of it. We are the first-hand witnesses of it. And so that's for the present mountaineers. For the future mountaineers, I really, really hope that you will get to enjoy the mountains as I've enjoyed it. I'll do my best to keep that for you. I can't guarantee anything, I am one man, but if we all unite together, all us mountaineers and all us Nepalis, in fact, we can protect our mountains. And so that's a message that I would pass on to the larger Nepali community, is that, you know, we are all in it together, right? Nepal has done so little to contribute to global climate change, yet we are on the forefront of this. So we need to unite. We should not lose hope, right? It might seem like a colossal problem, right? But we get there little by little. Okay, so we need to work together to do this. You know, Mount Everest isn't just climbed in one step. There's a million little steps, right? So we just need to be patient, and we need to work together. We get there at the end.
I think that was the perfect message to end this episode on. Thank you so much for joining us today and educating us about the impacts of climate change on the mountains as we try to navigate our own understanding of the climate crisis.
Thank you so much.
So much.
Thank you, guys. And good luck with the Anthropause podcast series. And, you know, I really look forward to, you know, listening to the other speakers that you have. You know, fantastic work, what you're doing, fantastic initiative.